Influence is a fun thing to talk about because no one really knows what the hell it means half the time. Does it mean you were influential on a specific aesthetic, a style, a sound? How many bands have to follow in your footsteps before you're considered valid in the anthology series of influence? Well, I tried to answer that question in a fun way. And so in this video, what I'm going to be doing is going over some of the metal bands that I believe to be the most influential. Basically, the list I constructed is a combination of bands that are a little bit more on the obvious side, but I want to pay the due diligence towards, and also some bands that maybe don't get their roses as often as they should. Condensing this list was hard. There were a lot of bands that could have made the list. Easily can make another part of this, but you can let me know down in the comment section below the bands in metal or rock history, modern or old, that you think are the most influential to a specific scene. The very first one that I just want to get out of the way because, yeah, Black Sabbath. I wouldn't feel the need to put this here if Ozzy hadn't just passed recently. I just want to say thank you to Ozzy Osbourne. I made a whole video about that, but in general, none of this shit would have existed without Black Sabbath. I'm not even talking about the advent of heavy metal like a lot of people talk about. It was Black Sabbath's influence on the ethos of metal, how offensive it felt, how edgy it felt, how dark it felt. It wasn't just about the speed. It wasn't even about Tony Iommi's guitar playing or the way that Ozzy did his vocals. It wasn't the speed or lack thereof of a lot of their music. Black Sabbath's influence pierced past that to affect the entire identity of metal. The sheer presence that Ozzy had and the general vibe of Black Sabbath is what carried on the legacy for heavy metal, because yes, you could boil it down to just sound alone, but in general, there were a lot of other bands in the 70s that were tampering with speed metal, that one of which, or a couple of which, may end up on this list, spoiler alert. So it wasn't about aggression, it wasn't about speed. There were plenty of bands that were probably going to set the framework for that form of metal. It was more so the identity and the framework, the foundation that Black Sabbath laid for so many bands that were going to come after them. Next up is a band that gets a lot of praise. They're very acclaimed. They're actually very popular and very old, but you don't hear them come up in conversations a lot of times alongside some of the other greats. I am talking about Diamond Head. Diamond Head influenced so much. They influenced so much of the thrash metal scene and so much of the revival of like OG heavy metal later in their history. They had a very interesting approach to writing their riffs because while on paper they were just a heavy metal slash speed metal band, but mostly just a classic heavy metal band a la Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, a lot of their influence came from progressive rock of that time, and so the way that they constructed riff ideas and stuff like that was very reminiscent of like Yes and Rush, but put in a heavy metal light. They also influenced some of the biggest heavy metal bands of all time, with Metallica and Megadeth both citing them as an influence. Next up, Celtic Frost. The 80s was a very interesting time for heavy metal music. Like, my god, there were so many different genres flourishing around that time, or finding their infancy. Goregrind, grindcore, death metal, black metal, extreme metal, power violence, so many different forms of extreme music were finding their footing and finally getting the chance to breathe a little bit and figuring out what the hell they actually were, and most of the time they stumbled. They didn't know what the fuck they were. They were very primitive and raw and archaic, and when you look back, that is why people love them so much. But when you look at Celtic Frost circumvented all of that and said, actually, we're just gonna do all of the fucking above, we're gonna do it amazingly, and we're gonna practically birth extreme metal. While around that time you had bands like Bathory and bands like Venom that would obviously constitute being on this list, but I think they're very obvious in terms of black metal. A lot of the black metal and the death metal bands of the early 80s going into the mid 80s and late 80s, they were kind of making a soup concoction of speed metal and thrash metal at the time, mixed with like heavy metal semblances, and it was just a little bit more raw and a little bit more pure aggression, but most of their influence came from thrash metal and specifically speed metal. If you look at early Bathory, if you look at early death, like Scream Bloody Gore era death, a lot of it was bleeding with speed metal influence. So Celtic Frost, for lack of better terms, felt like an eldritch abomination. There was just no other bands doing exactly what they were doing, mixing doom metal metal and black metal and death metal and extreme metal, and just birthing all of these different genres in their own way and showing that you could be experimental and also laying the framework for hybrid genres. Because around that time, if a band did something, that was their bread and butter. That's what they did. Most of the time you weren't going to get bands experimenting until going into like the late 80s and specifically the 90s, but nothing really hybrid existed back then. So when you had Celtic Frost, that was by their own admission holding a very avant-garde playing style in the 1980s, when the genres they were mixing were still hellaciously new at the time, it is incredible, and the influence that they had cannot be overstated. Next up, Mercyful Fate / King Diamond. Do I even need to go into this dude? Kind of similar to how Black Sabbath helped a lot of genres in terms of aesthetic and general energy, even though King Diamond sounds like he's taking a violent hammer swing to his nutsack every time he opens his mouth as a vocalist, which I mean that in the most positive way possible. They really did impact the vibe and the evil black incantation, black magic feel of a lot of early black metal. And while Bathory and Venom and Celtic Frost and stuff, they were very hateful, they felt very spiteful, no one rivaled the sheer, how will I put it, angst and darkness and kind of sometimes campiness and cheesiness that Mercyful Fate and King Diamond embodied. And, you know, I understand that early black metal is very serious. I love a lot of early black metal and Norwegian black metal, but let's be honest, that shit's campy. That shit's the theater camp. I think the conversation we're not ready for is black metal fans, and specifically OG black metal fans and bands, were kind of the theater kids of metal in the sense of how much they were outcasts and outsiders and how much camp they put into their videos and music and general vibe. A band I will always sing the praises of that does not get nearly enough hype, Ringworm. These guys have been so prolific. The amount of material that they have done over the years, insane. They've been kicking it since I believe like 1989, 1988, something like that. And they were making metalcore music at a time when it was just considered very heavy hardcore punk. It was back when metalcore actually had more hardcore punk influence and metal influence and wasn't just a breakdown fest. Throughout the years, I think a lot of their style has kind of blurred the lines of more modern metalcore, but I think that if you want to see some roots of metalcore with a lot of hardcore punk influence from like the late 80s going into the early 90s, and a very prolific discography that inspired a lot of bands specifically in the underground metalcore scene, please check Ringworm out. Next up, the Dillinger Escape Plan. A band that truly needs no introduction, a band that I wish would have lasted longer, that deserved to last longer. But kind of like a good TV show, they left while they were still good, so good on them for that. I don't think words can quantify what Dillinger Escape Plan did for sweaty guitar nerds, or just bands that wanted to be freakish. There are literal entire bands that base their riffs and specifically their drum patterns off of Dillinger blast, Dillinger beat. You will hear those terms slathered across bands. There was no one to do it like them. They're kind of similar to Converge, who very easily also could have been here in terms of being in their own field. But the sheer amount of respect you see from a lot of screamo and post-hardcore and mathcore and metalcore bands for Dillinger, it really is incredible to see. You can tell a lot of these people grew up loving them and got inspired to get into more technical and experimental music because of them. And without Dillinger, I don't think we could have gotten nearly as much fun material from a lot of metalcore bands. The entire musical landscape would be so different. Gotta throw in an obvious one, Linkin Park, your favorite band's favorite band. Like, literally everyone loves Linkin Park. Fucking extreme death metal bands love Linkin Park, metalcore bands love Linkin Park. The numbers that Meteora and Hybrid Theory did, the gateway that it gave for people that would never have even thought about getting into metal or rock. Usually if a band is really heavily worshipping a style, you can be like, well, yeah, they're clearly biting from that scene pretty hard. But unless you're just a diehard of a specific band they're influenced by, you're not going to be able to pinpoint it. Bitch, you can with Linkin Park! A band even remotely tries to sound like Linkin Park and people start pointing like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme. 21 Pilots made the contract, the entire comment section blew up and said it sounded like Linkin Park. Bring Me the Horizon started to incorporate Linkin Park influence, everyone knew that they were copying, in air quotes, Linkin Park or paying homage to them. So much of of what I Prevail were doing in their early years. People were pointing and saying, this reminds us so much of Linkin Park, and the list goes on, from Ashes to New as well. Linkin Park, kindly and respectfully put, is crack cocaine for my generation and for millennials. I'm not saying older bands couldn't be influenced by Linkin Park, I'm sure a whole host of them were, but if you were born between the years of like 1989-ish to say 2000, that's good soup. That did something for you. That touched a part of you. And it kind of makes me sad because I'm not a huge fan of new Linkin Park. They're fine. I just don't really like a lot of the Scientology stuff, and I don't really like a lot of the direction, and I don't really like the fact that it kind of feels like pandering to the past as opposed to forging a new way in Chester's legacy. I think that they definitely could go about it in a little bit of a different way, and I wasn't that big of a fan of the most recent album, but with that being said, I don't think that there has been any band from about 1995 forward that influenced more scenes, more people, not just in rock and metal, but in the entire musical landscape, and still continues to do that as Linkin Park. And even if I don't like new Linkin Park, I think they're gonna keep doing that. And I truly feel like that's what Chester would have wanted. And ultimately, outside of the musical influence, they just connected and resonated with a lot of broken kids at the time. There are very few bands and artists that can just universally speak to an isolated or lonely generation. You saw Nirvana do it with Gen X, and while nu metal did that for sort of disenfranchised youth at the time, no band even close spoke to that disenfranchised youth quite like Linkin Park did. And speaking of Nirvana, I want to talk about Alice in Chains. Alice in Chains is a metal band. The band themselves have called themselves a metal band. I understand they're also a grunge band in many ways, but literally the band members have gone on their record saying that they see themselves as a metal band. The alternative rock and alternative metal and post-grunge scene of the 2000s was massively inspired by Alice in Chains, and anyone that listens to Alice in Chains knows that. Because yeah, we had like Eddie Vedder doing his weird vocal styling, and you had Nirvana being massive, but if you listen to the riffs and you listen to the vocalizations and if you listen to the songwriting, I would argue that I think Alice in Chains had the most impact on the post-grunge and alt-metal and alt-rock scene of the 2000s compared to the other big four of grunge. Next up, and God, I love my job. I love being on YouTube because I get to say things like, next up, Carcass. Carcass, the band that decided to birth a genre and get bored of it and go conquer another one that someone else made. But jokes aside, yeah, Carcass birthed goregrind, and then they conquered melodic death metal, but I think generally speaking more so than just the creation of goregrind, which by its own is a big thing. Like, imagine being such a great band that you have to minimalize and be like, yeah, you know, they just created a genre, but maybe that's not the best thing they've done. I would argue that it was kind of how Carcass swerved off a cliff in terms of extreme metal at the time. Like I said, around that time you saw a lot of these bands with a lot of speed metal and thrash metal influence, and it took a lot of the grindcore bands to be gross, to be vile, to be grotesque, to make it a pissing match. Like, in the kindest way I can say, goregrind made it vicious. Goregrind made it gross. Carcass's gurgling asses come along and start making, you know, music about cutting people up and eating them and medical pathology and sounding like... And you could kind of attribute a lot of that to also, like, Napalm Death, who would lay the framework for stuff, but it is really fun to look back on Carcass and see the impact that they had on imagery, on aestheticism, and specifically making extreme metal gross, and opening the door for a whole host of very extreme genres that would come after them. Next up, praise be to Dark Tranquility, my personal favorite melodic death metal band, and a melodic death metal band that doesn't get enough praise and hype. When people think of melodic death metal, usually in the crown jewel records, you're gonna hear like Slaughter of the Soul. You're gonna hear At the Gates. You're gonna hear In Flames, because they are massively popular, massively influential, not taking that from them, they could easily be here too. But for me, Dark Tranquility, perhaps the most of the melodic death metal scene, really did fit the bill of what it stood for to begin with. You could make death metal that didn't feel like pansy music and still had a lot of guts and glory to it, but was insane insanely melodic and insanely beautiful and had a lot of harmony to it. Somber songs that were almost gothic and doom inspired in their nature. Beautiful compositions while not compromising the initial heart of death metal. They did and do that better than any band I've seen, genuinely. More than Arch Enemy, more than Amon Amarth, more than At the Gates and In Flames. And I simply do wish that more people hype them up because I think they are lovely. When it comes to death metal, you're gonna hear Morbid Angel, and you're gonna hear Autopsy and Obituary and Death, which all great bands, might I add. But I want to talk about Cannibal Corpse because in the field of grotesque and cookie cutter, brutal death metal, there's never been a band like Cannibal Corpse. The kings of consistency, the kings of fine tweaking your style. I think it is very understated how much influence Cannibal Corpse has had. I keep up with a lot of like the horror pain deathcore productions and the $20 spins of it all and the profound lores, and so many of these really low and murky and heavy cookie cutter old school death metal revival bands sound like Cannibal Corpse to me. And while Autopsy and Obituary probably get a little bit more worship, I think Cannibal Corpse really does deserve a lot. Plus, Corpse Grinder is just a really cool dude, and that never hurt anyone. Next up, Sunn. Stephen O'Malley and Greg Anderson have always challenged drone and noise and distortion in the field of metal, and that has inspired a lot. I know a lot of metalheads don't like to face that because a lot of metalheads just don't like noise, or they do like noise, but they like it diluted. They like it when the distortion and noise is packed into their metal. They don't like it on its own. I made a video about the importance of Sunn that I kind of want to redo at some point. My lord, their extensive catalog has been massively influential. And even if it isn't necessarily apparent on first listen because it's a very unwelcoming and cold dirge-like style of music, Sunn is a very, very interesting project in my personal humble opinion because I have seen both slow and fast bands put some influence on their name. As the #1 Varg hater, I will still say Burzum. I mean, yeah, I'm not a pussy to admit it. I don't like Varg. I own a Burzum shirt. I will always respect his influence. Regardless of how you feel about the dude, there are very few, if any, black metal artists, and just metal figures in general, that impacted the scene more than Varg. He also inspired a lot of Nazis, though, so it's kind of counterbalanced. I'm just joking. All ranting aside about Barg McKernis. Hugely influential, not just on Norwegian black metal, but black metal as a whole and extreme music. And the controversial aspects of his life that he has walked with also lended itself to a lot of black metal influence as a whole, as he has always existed as this figure and this beacon of counterculture that has existed within that space and given way to a lot of people who truly believed in him, whether they agreed with the politics of him or not, or the extremity or many of his actions that he did, they still believed in him. And while we can talk until the day is long about Varg as a person, there is no underselling his performance as an artist. Next up, 9 Inch Nails. It doesn't matter if you're on an entire bottle of Lexapro a day and you have been whisked away to the insane asylum. No one is a lyricist and a songwriter like Trent Reznor. Just close your eyes and imagine something for a moment. Imagine being able to say that in your timeline, you wrote a song that was phenomenal, that a lot of people resonated with, which by itself is a gift, is a blessing. But you get to say about it that Johnny Cash made a Grammy Award-winning video and song that you literally said became his song, and then kicked the bucket after Johnny Cash, but also got to see David Bowie perform it on stage. Bitch, I'd be flexing that for the rest of my life, the hell? I mean, outside of that, it's just the despondent and depressive approach to songwriting that the dude took. I mean, even outside of like the industrial stuff that he did and how that impacted a lot of metal going into the future, Trent Reznor pretty much method acts on every album he ever creates. So the influence that 9 Inch Nails gave to a lot of dark songs and dark sounds, and you just saw Falling in Reverse try to bite off 9 Inch Nails recently, so it's still very much happening. But if we're talking about dark influence, let's talk about creepy influence. Korn. The amount of bands that bit off Korn in the new metal scene and are still biting off Korn in the new metal and new metalcore scene. Kind of like Linkin Park, you can always tell when a band is trying to sound like Korn. You're even hearing rappers, like a rapper went viral because he was literally like Lil Korn pretty much. A lot of vocalists like like to act like Jonathan Davis. A lot of bands like to have those little creepy interludes and moments, and you could always tell when a specific nu metal riff is dripping with Korn influence. I don't think I have to punctuate this with much more. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Whether it's nu metal or new metalcore, contemporary bands were taking influence from Korn at the time, so imagine later. Next up, Behemoth. Behemoth is an interesting entry here, and they're here for one reason, because you might be asking yourself, well, what is really Behemoth influenced? I think Behemoth has influenced the state of black metal, but most importantly, showed that there is a middle ground when it comes to popularity, where you don't have to change your style, where you don't have to be commercially viable, where you can be openly satanic and hateful and spiteful and aggressive and angry at the world and nihilistic and not change up your style and be this symphonic laden evil black metal band with crazy stage antics and crazy presence and still get hundreds of thousands of views and streams. So follow your dreams, black metal bands. Not every black metal band has to be baby's first black metal with fucking training wheels on it like Cradle of Filth is. Cradle of Filth did nothing wrong, I just love dissing them because it's funny. But my voice hurts and I'm gonna wrap it up here. You can let me know down in the comment section below your thoughts of my list, as well as if you'd like to see a part 2 and your picks for some of the most influential metal and rock bands of all time. Let me know down in the comment section below, I can't wait to hear it. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is, my name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.